Hey guys, this is Alex from Wilkinson Audio. Last time I did a mixing tutorial, we mixed An Endless Decline by Sam Whitaker using only stock plugins. Uh, my friend Taylor Gormley and I have mixed it again using third-party plugins to kind of demonstrate the differences between just using the stock plugins and why you would use third-party plugins, and how they kind of add color and texture to the mix and make it more interesting. So we've already done that. If you want, if you like the sound of this, you can get Taylor or I to do your mixes for you. This is his Facebook page. So if you have any songs you need mixed, you can contact one of us and listen to the stuff he's done before. So this is the song that we were working on. And that's Sam's mix of it, and this is Taylor and I's mix of it. So if you like the sound of this, follow along with this tutorial. I'll go through the mix and I'll show you what we did to achieve that sound. It's always great to work with other audio engineers when possible, because sometimes you get in the habit of doing things the same way over and over again, and it's just it's really cool to see different ways of going about things and different ways of doing things, and it can help you from hitting a wall or something like that in terms of your mixing. And I highly recommend it when possible to collaborate with other audio engineers and stuff, just for fun and see what you come up with. So for this, we did a few different techniques than we did in my video. The first one that's pretty notable is here we have a bus called Mix Glue, which every single thing is in everything's bus to this. We could have just put this on the master track. I don't know why we didn't do that, but you could easily just take this effect and just put it on the master. It'd be the same thing if it's the first thing in the mastering chain. So what we're using for Mix Glue, and by glue we just mean trying to create a cohesive sound out of all of the tracks. We're trying to make them sound like they fit together better. And what we've used for that is Decapitator, which is a plugin by Soundtoys, and it just basically emulates analog circuitry. And when people say glue and stuff like that, and a lot of the time when people are trying to achieve glue, it just means that they're running similar processing on a large number of tracks. And when you run similar processing on a large number of tracks, it tends to blend them together a bit, and then it makes them just sound more coherent, cohesive. So this is kind of how you achieve that, and I'll show you with this plugin kind of what it's doing. So this is on everything. This is you can just imagine this is on the 2-bus. It's a pretty subtle effect. I'll actually turn up the drive so you can really hear what it's doing. It's just adding saturation, harmonics, and just kind of thickening the sound up, which is kind of a nice sound, especially when you're recording in digital, because you don't really get a lot of that stuff unless you're running analog hardware. So this kind of helps add that back into your mix. Another cool part about this plugin is that it has a tone knob. So if you ever found the entire mix you've done was either too bright or a little bit too bright or a little bit too dark, you could actually adjust it with this instead of going and redoing the entire mix. If it's way too bright or way too dark, you might want to redo the entire mix. But if it's just a little bit, this can kind of help you even it out, and I'll kind of show you how you could do that here. So you can see how you could balance your mix out pretty easily just using that one knob. So that's pretty handy. Okay, so let's go to our drums and have a listen to how they sound. So if you followed my last tutorial, the way that I did the busing and the parallel compression is different than the way that we did it in this mix. In this mix, we actually have separate tracks that we're running all of the drum tracks to as sends, but we're not sending them all at the same level. So we have Smashy Bus, which is like an absolutely distorted all the Smashy bus does is trying to thicken up everything. It's just trying to make everything huge and everything sustain and just kind of like everything kind of angry sounding. And I'll solo right now. And it's also evening, since it's that distorted, it's really evening everything out, leveling everything. Obviously in the mix you don't hear this bus very much, it's turned down very low, but it really thickens everything up and helps keep things consistent. And that's actually done again with Sound Toys. We've taken Devil Lock and just crushed the signal basically with Devil Lock. And it's also parallel mixed in. It's not 100%, it's 40% mixed in with the signal. I don't know if you're ever going to take these settings exactly, but if you are, it's 40% mixed. So that's how we did that, and that's just one of the parallel buses that we have running. There's another one, parallel compression bus, which has this solid bus comp, which is the Native Instruments, I believe, an SSL emulation for it's supposed to be like an SSL bus compressor. And we've just used that on another track, and this is just a regular kind of parallel bus that's just supposed to add groove and stuff like that. You just kind of set the compressor to pump musically with the track, and that's what you want. You just want to kind of groove and add some rhythm to the whole thing. And I'll solo that and I'll play it back for you right now. It's pretty subtle. It's only taking about 6 dB of gain reduction off, but I can probably crank it up here for you, and you can really hear what it's doing. We could actually probably set these settings to be a little more musical and rhythmic as well. Let me try and do that here real quick. In my opinion, I'm not really getting the results I want from that. It's not pumping the way I'd want it to. Personally, I would probably switch that out for a different plugin, but we did this mix real quick with just whatever was on this computer, so that's what we ended up with, and I guess in the end it sounded okay, but you could probably get that to sound better. But anyways, that's just adding some rhythmic compression in the way that I showed you in the last tutorial. And then what else do we have here? We're using, instead of using the drum samples that came with it that we mixed last time, I believe, we're using Progressive Foundry in Superior Drummer. Oops, there we go. And yeah, so that's the sample set we're using. We've also done some other stuff with that. We're not just using this sample set. We're actually also blending in some additional kick samples and stuff like that to thicken up the sound of our drums and get them more like how we envision it to be like in the end. So we're just using samples to kind of make our starting point closer to our goal. So for the kick drum, that's basically the sound we ended up getting from the Superior kit, which sounds kind of weird on its own, but it sounds great with this other sample we've added in because we've kind of mixed them together and stuff and just messed with it to all sound good. And sometimes you get like really weird results where the tracks kind of sound odd by themselves but really cool together, and this is one of those times where we were just fiddling with it and we got an unconventional sound for this track, and then this track is just a regular one shot, and together they sound pretty cool. So that'll sometimes happen, and it's kind of cool when that happens because it usually means you're going to get kind of a unique sound. Well, I usually find whenever I have weird tracks like that kind of work together with other tracks, you get kind of a cool sound with a lot of characters. So that's not necessarily a bad thing when you have kind of odd sounding tracks at some points that fit into the mix. Our snare drum sounds like this. Actually, I'll go through the kick processing too as well. So we just have some EQ on the kick bus of the two different sources, the triggered one shot and the Superior kick. It's coming from the MIDI. So we just have two different EQs, solid EQ, which is just like a regular hardware kind of EQ, and Pro Q. You could probably just do it all in Pro Q if you wanted. And then for the kick drum being sent from Superior, we just have another EQ, just taking off some low end there. And then we have the triggered one shot, which again just has some EQ, taking off some low end, and then a gate that I added to make the sample sustain a bit less long. So really not much going on there. A lot of the sound of this drum processing and a lot of Taylor's productions it mostly comes from the parallel buses, more so than compressing in individual elements heavily. Not always, but his sound is more like it's more bus related and bus processing rather than individual track related. It's kind of different the way he does it. Well, I guess a few people do that, but it's interesting to see. So for the snare, we have Decapitator, which is going to be adding some color to it. That's on the bus. I'll show you what it sounds like with and without Decapitator. So you can just hear it adding some saturation and harmonics and fattening the snare up. Then we have some compression. Which is just adding a bit of snap to the drum. You can add like a nice, you can enhance your transient a bit with the compressor on your snare drum. So that's just what this is doing. And then again, we have Pro Q2 just doing some EQing. So not too much actually going on there. Just a bit of saturation EQ. The toms are just a gate to stop the ring out from being crazy or too crazy, getting out of hand. You might want to gate them manually, print the tracks and gate it manually if you're doing like a professional production. We were just doing this pretty quick. Then EQ again, and then a multi-band, FabFilter's Pro MB, which is like a multi-band EQ almost in the way it works. It's a multi-band compressor, but it like kind of works like, and it's kind of weird. It's almost like an EQ as well. It's kind of freaky, but it's cool and it works really well in a lot of cases. So highly recommend it. And that's just controlling the low end of it. You'll see when we play, or I'll find a part that has toms here. It's just making sure that the low end doesn't get out of hand. It's going to compress any frequency under 120, but it's going to leave the rest of the spectrum alone. And that's what you can do with a multi-band compressor. You can just compress certain regions. And that's really handy in stuff like controlling low end of bass guitars and toms. So definitely learn how to use multi-band compression. It's very, very useful for particularly if you're getting tracks that aren't perfect to begin with. Multi-band compression can basically rescue tracks that were improperly tracked. And then at the end, we just have, this is just being a limiter, just total limiting, 0 milliseconds attack and release, and then infinite. And it's just taking off it's evening out the transients of the toms so that none of them poke out of the mix. But it's barely doing it. It's just clipping a dB off or so. And that's just leveling things out a little bit. And we have our overhead bus, which is affecting the overheads and the rooms together in one bus. So all of the distant and ambient mics, essentially. And then the processing on that is just EQ taking out some mid-range. So that's just the overheads. That's just the rooms. And here's both together. And then when you mix them all together, you get this. These are just the original drums that came with the project that we didn't use this time. So they're just in there, but they're not used. For guitars, I think we did them similar to the way I did it last time. There's some EQ going on here just to remove harshness. I guess just to remove some boxiness and some harshness and take away some fizz. Again, multi-banding in the muddy, kind of the boomy 100 to 200 hertz range, and keeping the high-end fatiguing frequencies from 2K to 5K. Well, anywhere from about 1K to 4K can be pretty brutal. I guess in this particular instance, we thought that the 2K to 6K needed to be controlled, and we just need to make sure that those frequencies didn't, are kept in check. And and so that the guitar just doesn't become fatiguing. So we added a multiband to ensure that that happens, and then another EQ just for color. Sometimes it's nice to use this type of EQ that doesn't have a graphical interface because it forces you to kind of listen to things more. And these are kind of good for coloring because they typically have kind of like wider cues and stuff like that, and they're more they're less surgical. They just kind of are great for just coloring the sound, or just, yeah, it's hard to describe. They just use these sometimes. That's all I'd say about that. All right, so moving on. That was just the bus compression, or the bus processing for the rhythm guitars. And so we have our rhythm left guitar, rhythm right guitar that also have the actual amp sims and effects on them. So we have TSE 808, which is a free tube screamer emulation, going into JCM 800 hot preamp, which is made by, I don't know how to say it exactly, Mercurial, I think it is. And this, it's weird. This is like, it's also a free plugin, but this is one of the best guitar amp plugins I've ever heard. Like, the Mercurial stuff is ridiculously good, and no one seems to know about it, which blows my mind because it's awesome. So grab that, it's free. And then we're using actually my own impulses for guitar cabs. And this is Simples Freddy, which is a Mesa oversized 4x12. I can't even remember what one both means and two both. I know both means that it was a Fredman setup and had an angled and straight on mic. One is probably the power section of a 5150 that we ran it through, I believe. And then two, I think, is the power, like one of those Mesa power amps, I think, because we ran through a few different power amps to get different kind of tones and stuff in the Simples impulses. So you can get them off my website, wilkinsonaudio.com, if you want. We just ran them through a few different power amps to get some different colors and stuff like that. But we never really labeled them, so it's kind of confusing. But we probably should have in hindsight. But you can just kind of go through them and find one that you like the sound of and go with that. This is actually a mix of two. We're actually mixing two impulses together here. So we're mixing one both with two both to get the final cab sound of this guitar. And I'll solo the guitar and you can hear what it sounds like. Just the rhythms. I think that's actually a bit fizzy, so I'm just gonna reduce this low pass here. That's better. And then the clean guitar is just a hang on one sec here, I'm just trying to figure this out. Apparently the clean guitar is just the DI. That's kind of weird, but I guess that might be what we did, and we added delay to it, and we added a reverb to it. And it sounds kind of cool. That's really weird, because I thought we used an amp simulation on that, but I guess we didn't. It's just the DI. Sounds cool. All right. And lead center is Tube Screamer again, Harlequin, which is another Mercurial one. It's based on another amp. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but you can look it up. It's probably just called a Harlequin, but and again, we're using more of my impulse responses here for guitar cabs. Freddy again, mixed with Dave. Dave is a weird cab. It's like a small Mesa cab that I put acoustic treatment in, and then 4 different speakers, mostly just for tracking leads and stuff like that. But there's impulses of it. They're actually free, and you can grab them off wilkinsonaudio.com if you want them. And so there's a Greenback V30, T75, and a K100 all in that cab. And I just use it for recording leads and stuff like that of different, you can mic up the speaker that you want and get different colors and stuff like that. We have impulses in here of all the individual speakers and blends of the different speakers and stuff like that. So this is a blend of all of them together, mixed with Freddy through the first power amp both mics because it's a Fredman setup. So that's just a big mix of a bunch of IRs for the guitar cab impulse of this center lead here. And this delay and reverb is actually on the bus for the clean guitars, and I guess the lead, we just had the lead under there. It probably shouldn't be under the term clean, but it is just because we did this quickly. Okay, so that's pretty much how the guitars are working in this. There's our bass guitar. Here's the processing on it. FabFilter Pro MB to keep the sub lows and the lows in check, and we'll just see how that's interacting with the bass here. This is on the bus, so it's interacting with both these channels because it's in the folder track, which is essentially the same as the bus in other DAWs. So let's play it. And yeah, and so that's just keeping it level and in check and making sure that nothing gets out of hand in the low frequency spectrum, which is kind of hard to make sit sometimes. This is a program bass, so it's pretty level to begin with, which is nice because bass usually is not. Generally, you'd have to do a lot more leveling and stuff than this to get a bass guitar to sit nicely. But since this is a program bass from a VSTI, it's very easy to make it sit because it's so consistent from the get-go. This is the processing on the low end track, because we did it the same way that a lot of people process bass instruments. You have your low end track and you have a grit or high end track. That kind of the low end track is just kind of the sub lows and lows of the instrument, and then the grit track is the stuff that makes it kind of intelligible in the mix, so you can actually hear it in the mix. So our processing on our low end track here is just a low pass. That's all it is. Well, yeah. Low pass, yeah. It's just a low pass. And then on the grit track, it's just basically a band pass between 2 kilohertz and 10 kilohertz kind of thing, but we changed the Q on it to kind of tailor off a bit here. So it's just kind of these mid frequencies and high mid frequencies here that we wanted to keep for this grid track. There's actually no amp or anything on this, but there is a limiter that's limiting the crap out of it to even it out. Well, it's actually not even limiting the crap out of it. It's only doing like 6 to 8 dB of gain reduction, which is actually not that huge. But as I said, this is a VSTI bass that was generated, and it's much more consistent than a typical bassist would be. So you can get away with a lot less processing than you're going to need if an actual bassist gives you performance, unless they're really, really good. You'll see the levels and stuff of a typical bass performance will be all over the place, not nice and even like this. So when you combine all those tracks together, like this is very minimal processing for bass, and it ends up with kind of a cool raw sound, because a lot of times with the grid tracks, I think I did in the other video, you'll add some kind of amplifier or something to it or some kind of thing to color it. You could use a decapitator or something like that as well, just to kind of give this more color or more character if you wanted to. In this case, this actually sounds really cool. So it really doesn't need much at all. In the other tutorial, I did a global reverb and stuff like that. We didn't do that in this one. It's a very aggressive mix. There's really not much reverb on it at all. It's very in your face, and that's fine for how it sounds. You could do a global reverb on the master bus here if you wanted to add some a slight amount of room tone or something like that, just to add a sense of space, and it might add some like a more coherent sound to the whole thing, which could be cool. We didn't do that in this particular mix, but that's something that you could play around with. For the effects, we didn't mix the effects. I just did a quick fader job on the effects just to level them out to around where they should be. Most of them actually sit fairly well as they are, but you could just go through and EQ them to your taste if you found that they were causing some mud or whatnot in the mix. Again, we also during the quiet part of the mix with the clean guitars, I've automated the grit track of the bass down, because otherwise it's a little overwhelming. So that's something to keep in mind, is as the balance of your instruments change in the mix, like, you know, we don't have these massive rhythm guitars taking up all the frequencies, and these become, the high end of the bass becomes very audible at that point, and it's not balanced anymore. We have to automate those, like we had to automate that to make sense in the context of the part. So we turned the bass grid down, because obviously we don't want like a super crazy loud bass during this quiet part. We want everything to kind of be laid back and chill. Another reason you don't want the bass to stick out at that part is it's arguably not the focus of that part. The clean guitars are more important, and generally you want the more important instruments to be more audible, and you want to give them kind of more of the frequency spectrum and just more attention. And so this mix that has a lot of vibe and stuff to it, and glue due to all the parallel compressing and stuff like that, is actually simpler than it sounds, because it sounds fairly polished and fairly professional, but there's actually not that much going on most of the tracks, surprisingly. So I guess I'll show the mastering chain here now as well. Okay, so the mastering chain is just one of these color, another SSL G comp compressor, or SSL G series kind of compressor, doing some basic parallel comp on the entire mix again. So we have on this track, we have a lot more compression on the entire track, or a lot more effects on the entire track than we did in the previous mix. Just a lot more bus kinds of compression and color and texture and stuff like that coming from decapitator and compression. Then we have one of these EQs, parametric, without the interface, just for color and stuff like that, and large adjustments. Then we have SDRR, which is another type of saturation again. I think I've showed this in the mastering one in the last one. The master mix bus enhancer with the drive set to 1, and then you set these accordingly. And that's something that I generally find makes it sound better, so I do that all the time. And then we have FabFilter Pro L, just doing some limiting, and that's getting our loudness to commercial levels. So that's pretty much this whole mix here. There's really not much to it. A couple other things I wanted to point out is always be checking phase and stuff like that when you're blending samples together. It's definitely possible you should always check phase when you're combining samples, especially when the samples are from different sample sets, because it's definitely possible to end up with samples that are totally opposite in phase and stuff like that. And you might, and if you're finding your kick drums or something that are really hard to mix, you have multiple samples going on, definitely check the phase of all of them and stuff like that. Make sure they're working together in tandem. Our phase is inverted on the snare, which is because, again, we have our superior snare drum here, and then we have another augmented sample, which is, I guess, one of Nolly from Peripheries. Must be a sample he made, and this is, again, a one-shot. One-shots are nice because they're very consistent. You don't have to worry about leveling out one-shots. The only problem with, like, one-shot, and, well, I should describe what a one-shot is. One-shot is when you use a single sample instead of, like, a round robin of samples. So instead of having 10 different hits on a snare drum to make it sound human, you only use one sample. And one sample is awesome because it's easy to EQ it, because it never changes or anything like that, and it stays very level. The only problem with it is that it sounds very robotic. But if you blend one samples in with your track, it can really thicken them out and add consistency. And your other samples will still be, that are not one shots, will keep the humanization, like the human quality in the. Basically, when you add one shots, you just want to make sure that they don't make it sound robotic. You want to mix them a little bit lower, so that they just add consistency, but it's not obvious that you have the same sample hitting every time. So we have this blended in with the superior drum snare, and that's just adding some consistency. It actually blends in fairly nicely with the snare. They actually sound somewhat similar, so that works out pretty well. I think that's pretty much all I wanted to point out, and hopefully this gives you guys some ideas on how to mix this stuff. Going forward, I'll probably be using and integrating more plugins and using less free plugins, because you can't get this sound or like this decapitator sound, like that kind of distortion and stuff like that from the stock plugins. There's just no plugin to do it, right? And that's why you want these third-party plugins, is they're specialized, they have special characters and stuff like that, and sometimes we want those specific characters for specific sounds, and that's why you invest in third-party plugins. Because otherwise, as you'll find with our other mixes that we did, if you use stock plugins and stuff like that, the mixes end up very clean, but they don't really have much character because nothing's really saturating in interesting ways. And yeah, basically all the plugins we're using have no saturation and no real character. Like, so you end up with and if you like the sound of a very clean, transparent mix, then by all means you can use stock plugins. But if you want to get into saturation and stuff like that, that is going to make your mix interesting and colorful and probably more unique to yourself as an audio engineer, you're probably gonna need some third-party plugins. And over the years, you'll find ones you like and stuff, and that'll kind of define your sound as an audio engineer, which is very, very important, because that's the only thing that separates you from other audio engineers, is the sound of your work, basically. So that's really important that you develop a unique way to mix, and yeah, and just and the way you're going to do that is just by experimentation with various hardware and software until you find stuff you like, and then you'll develop a workflow and a way of doing things that's your own, and you will sound like nobody else. And yeah, and that's pretty much the goal. So that I think covers everything. If you have any questions or whatnot, just let me know. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say about this. Hopefully that was fairly clear. I doubt it was, but hopefully it was useful to you, and awesome. So I'll see you guys next time, and thanks for watching.